Previously on Flowers for Zoe, Stories for Dennis.
I feel like in active addiction, I put all of this blame for everything that was going wrong in my life on everyone else. I thought everybody was, in a sense, out to get me or to make my life harder, but it was me and my addiction that made every situation in my life harder. It wasn't anybody else but myself.
And now, coming up on the show,
If the withdrawal didn't kill me, the using would have.
my goal going in to see each of these people was to make them cry the way that I cried. And then I would know that they understood.
You might be actually touching a little bit on what we call compassion fatigue.
On today's podcast, you'll hear me and Zoe explain what went wrong while navigating Zoe through addictions and mental health services. If you feel activated by anything on today's show, please reach out and talk to somebody. If you like what you hear, please share the link for the show. Welcome to podcast number 10.
Okay, so today we're talking about service providers and getting help.
This topic really it spoke to me because it made me realize that we're going to be going back a few months into Zoe's time of struggle. It brought me right back to the very beginning, the very first night. And I tried to remember when it was exactly that service providers became a big part of what we were trying to do. And we started making phone calls, and the objective back then was, it started off with, but quickly became something else, but it started off with, how are we going to get Zoe into detox?
You say, how are we going to get Zoe into detox? And so who is we? And is Zoe part of that at that time?
I mean, it's kind of yes and no, because Zoe quickly communicated to us that she would not go to detox. And she explained why. She had a horrible experience the first time she went to detox. It was being left alone in a room for 3 days and having to push through withdrawals without any medical support whatsoever. So she quickly put a kibosh on any plans that me and Laura were talking about how to get Zoe into detox.
Do you remember that, Zoe?
I somewhat remember the very beginning. It's very faint though. Like I don't remember too much. This is why I enjoy hearing about it, right? Because it brings back, will like trigger my memory on things, right?
Mm-hmm. At what point did you decide that some kind of professional help was needed? Do you remember that?
Well, at the beginning, I knew I didn't want to go to detox. Like Daniel said, I didn't like the experience I had previously. It didn't work for me. It wasn't. I just wasn't able to get through it, and I was scared that that's how it was going to be. But I knew I needed help from somebody with experience, with people with experience, you know. I just didn't know how to do that, which is why tapering came in, which was my dad's idea. And that was kind of an at-home thing. It was almost like I was more comfortable with it because it wasn't set in stone. I wasn't checking myself in somewhere where I couldn't check out. You know, I was home. I was in the comfort of my own space, and I knew in the back of my head that I always had that backup plan of like, if I am too uncomfortable, I can, you know, as bad as it sounds, I could just use again and be okay. Where I wasn't locked in somewhere, I didn't have any options, right? But I knew I needed professional help to be on my side from the very beginning. I just knew I didn't want detox.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So having had that experience of going through really painful withdrawals and not feeling like you were having any support around that, that made it sounds to me like that made it unbearable to think about
Yes.
doing that again. And that
Yeah.
was just not an option at that point based on that experience you had.
That was really pivotal because from that point on, anytime we spoke to Zoe's GP or the receptionist at Zoe's GP or the pharmacist or the methadone doctor, it was like, okay, we need help. And then they said, okay, you need help. Let's get you into detox. And then we said, nope, we're not doing detox. What's next? What next do you have for us? And they had nothing. They had absolutely nothing.
So at this point, you were on methadone,
Yes.
but you're also using street grade fentanyl
Yes.
and maybe other things.
Whatever was in it. Yes.
Okay. So at this point, is the methadone working? Is the methadone not working?
So okay, methadone does work. Okay, well, it helps with any type of withdrawal. It helps with keeping you stable without the use of street drugs. It does work. My mistake was I was on methadone and I continued to use, and I was on kind of the highest dose that is okay to be on, which was 120 mils, and I was still continuing to use fentanyl. So when even though the methadone was helping with my continuing use of fentanyl, it fucked me over, because when I stopped using fentanyl, the highest dose of methadone that I was on wasn't covering those withdrawals, because my tolerance had built up so high because I was using not only methadone but fentanyl. When I took the fentanyl out of the equation, the methadone wasn't covering my withdrawal symptoms. I was still sick. I was still feeling like shit.
So when you share this information with the clinic, with your primary practitioner, what are they saying? What are they urging or encouraging you to do?
Well, at that point, they didn't know, because their answer for somebody who wants to get clean is, hey, go on methadone, and that will kind of like level out your withdrawals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you won't also be putting yourself at risk by using fentanyl, which you don't know what could possibly happen, right? So that was kind of their answer, which brings me into, so when I did agree to, I'm jumping forward a bit, when I did agree to go into detox with like all the good things I heard, with that they were going to help me medically, they were going to make sure that my withdrawals weren't excruciating, they were going to be manageable. When I did go there, they were actually new to my situation of being on methadone and still using fentanyl, and my tolerance being so high that the 120 mils of methadone alone wasn't cutting it for me. That they kind of made up a plan while being there, which was to have me remain on 120 mils, but also put me on to 40 milligrams of Cadian, which started off at 10. I was still not comfortable. They bumped it to 20, still wasn't comfortable. They bumped it to 30, wasn't comfortable, bumped it to 40. And then I was finally comfortable with 120 mils of methadone and 40 milligrams of slow release Cadian, which is basically morphine.
Let's go back just a little bit to that time when you've been placed on the list, a referral's been submitted for medically supported detox. And so this is the first time in a while that you've been open and receptive. You're still a little bit ambivalent. You're not quite sure if you're going to go, but the referral's been submitted so you can go into the hospital into a medically supported detox program and potentially start some rehab program after.
That was a big step, because as soon as Zoe's name was on that list,
Mhm.
it opened doors. All of a sudden, we were able to call the nurses there and give them a daily check-in if we wanted to. We could say, okay, Zoe's doing good. She's consistently taking her street fentanyl 3-4 times a day, whatever it was at the time. And, they would be really curious about that and ask how she's doing and making sure that she's safe and healthy. And, they would make sure that I had all the Narcan kits here, and they were kind of on top of things like that. It invited more people onto our team because at this point, the team was me, Zoe, Lara. Really, it was the three of us. And we were navigating through what to do next and all of that stuff. But as soon as Zoe's name got on the list, it opened up a whole new pile of resources. And that was extremely comforting to know that we had this team of professionals, that if something went wrong, we could call them and kind of rely on them. And yeah, that was a huge relief.
So up until this point, it really was about harm reduction at home. We're waiting for her bed to become available. We're waiting for her to get the phone call to say, come on in, you can get started. And so everything leading up to that was about harm reduction at home and tapering.
Yes. And also, as soon as the bed was available, we knew that we had to have this conversation with Zoe. And Zoe was dead set against going in. Dead set. So we knew there was a huge battle coming up. It was going to be a tough one. Even now when I think about it, the first thing I think about is Dennis, because we had that battle with Dennis too, and we lost. We lost in the sense that he never went, right? And I was just terrified that this path with Zoe was going to be leading down that same destination. And that was really scary because we didn't know what to do from that point on. It was really going to rely on Zoe and how she reacted to a bed being available.
Do you remember this, Zoe?
Somewhat, a little bit, but I kind of remember when I was told that the bed was available, because it happened pretty quick. It was like I was expecting like to be waiting a few months, maybe, like maybe a month and a half or 5 weeks, whatever. And it happened quite fast. And when I was finally told like a bed is available, I was like, holy shit. Like,
But Zoe, you had an epiphany, and it happened on the night that Zoe was going through really bad withdrawals. I was having to wake her up to dose, or else she would sleep past the 8-hour mark. And then when she wakes up, she would be going through extremely severe withdrawal. So I'd have to wake her up early to dose. And the one evening she didn't wake up, she was having a really hard time waking up. And when she finally did wake up and she kind of got her senses together, she looked at me and she said, you know what, this would be so much easier in detox. And that was her realization that, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Zoe, but that's when you made up your mind that yes, going into detox was an option.
I kind of remember that.
You were scared shitless. You thought you were going to die.
Yeah.
It was really scary.
I knew if it's crazy. I knew if the withdrawal didn't kill me, the using would have.
What was your fear about going into the hospital?
Getting there and then realizing that them realizing that I was such a fucking threat to my own self that they wouldn't let me out.
And the way we prepared for that was by talking to detox, because Zoe had all of these preconceptions about what detox was going to be. And I'm sure you must have said it once or twice. What if I get there and they don't let me go? So we brought all of those concerns to detox to David. And he did such an amazing job to say, Zoe, that's not the way it works here. We're not going to do that. This is what we will do here. You're going to come in. You're going to register. At this point, you could leave anytime you want. And we're never going to keep you here against your will.
So
Yeah.
this was the big fear, was there was a
Yes.
lot of unknowns. There was
Yes.
unknowns about, okay, if I go in and this is voluntary and something should change, and then suddenly, my rights change. So that was a big fear. That
It
was
was
a
a
big fear.
huge fear because
Yeah.
once I'm in there, like my fear of getting there, not being able to go through the withdrawal and feeling like that,
Mhm.
and then not being able to leave and feeling stuck, I was really scared.
What else made you question whether the hospital was going to be able to help you?
I just felt like healthcare professionals a lot of the time don't fully understand addiction and
There is a mistrust of service providers sometimes. There's this recognition that, yeah, you're educated in this field, but sometimes it also feels like you don't really get it. And so I'm wondering,
Mhm.
what then should we talk about to pull this together? Because I think that there's some, your story, Zoe, is incredibly helpful. And Daniel, yours too. Daniel brings the caregiver lived experience of trying to navigate services at a time when there were so many more questions than answers. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty. Zoe, there was a lot of ambivalence. You didn't know who you could trust. You were sort of oscillating between being ready and not being ready. So, what worked when service providers were being helpful? What was it that they were doing that was helpful?
I felt like we had to groom the people that were helping us. I'd lay it all out on the table for him. And one of those stipulations was Zoe does not want to go to detox. So that can't be your solution. I had to prepare him to make sure that he wasn't going to screw this up. And I'm serious when I say that, because he could have said the wrong thing to Zoe and Zoe would make up her mind. And when Zoe makes up her mind, she makes up her mind. It would take a lot to change her mind. I would much rather have Zoe in a place where she's still willing to contemplate going into detox and not push it. And I had to make sure that David was like that. And I had to get him to understand that. And like, I would not take a chance. There's no way I would put him on the phone with Zoe and hopefully his suggestion works. And Zoe's like, yeah, okay, I'll try detox. I wasn't going to take that chance. And it was so frustrating for him because I assume he's used to saying to family members, look, this is great. These are all great ideas, but I got to talk to Zoe. None of this works unless I talk to Zoe. And he'll only talk to Zoe. And that was a barrier that had to be broken through. And we did that. And that was a big part of that. That was a big part of feeling like, yes, Zoe's going to be taken care of.
So when you talk about David, you're talking about the intake worker. So intake workers who are the people that are receiving the calls and assessing. They're asking questions to get an idea of what is it that this person needs. Is this the right program for them? And so if it's Zoe calling, then it's first person. It's Zoe calling and saying, hey, I have problematic substance use. I want some help with it. This is what's happening. And she's self-referring. Well, it's very different when it's a caregiver calling. Caregiver calling says, hey, there's somebody in my life and we're really concerned about them and they're not doing okay and their substance use is out of control and we need some help. And this is where some of the challenges begin, because you can want that for somebody, but unless that person, it kind of goes back to that voluntary nature of service, right? They can talk to a care provider and they may get it and they may say, yeah, this is a program. This is a program that can help people with medically supported detox. But unless that person wants this service, we can't make them come in.
Right. And I know I've heard that 150 billion times over the last 6 months. And it does me no good hearing that. It really doesn't.
Yeah. So
Because
what's the problem with that?
the problem with that is if Zoe doesn't want to go to detox, I understand that you cannot commit her without the proper psychiatric evaluation. I know that. Let's move on now. What's the plan? And I kept on going back to, okay, what's the plan? And my plan was to convince Zoe to go on a detox. And I knew what Zoe's obstacles were. She didn't want to be locked up. She didn't want to be put in a room for 3 days by herself alone. So that's what we spoke about. And David must have said to Zoe finally enough times where, look, Zoe, you're not going to be committed. We can't do that. That's not in our mandate or whatever. You're not going to be left alone for 3 days in a room. It's going to be more like 3 weeks that you're here. You are going to be given medical support when you're going through your withdrawals. And that was another thing we had to do, to tell David, these are the withdrawals that Zoe is going through. And that was huge, because if Zoe gets on the phone with this guy and he says anything to diminish the withdrawals that she was going through, Zoe's basically hanging up on this guy right away. I knew that. Because again, Zoe's heard it so many times. You just got to suck it up. You're going to have to go through this. And lo and behold, we did get to a point where David was no longer the only person we're talking to. We're talking to another caregiver now. And lo and behold, she does say this. She does make those comments to Zoe. And
what's the comment that she made? Do you remember?
It was along the lines of, well, Zoe, we don't know if we're going to give you medically supported because we have to evaluate you first. That was a big one. Zoe almost turned around and walked out the front door.
Give some context around this. When you say walk out the door, is this over the phone? Is this?
No, at this point, we're doing the intake. So we're at the detox center. We've registered. And now we're going to go up to the 4th or 5th floor or whatever it is, I forgot. And we're walking up the floor. We're heading to basically Zoe's room. And that's when, and Zoe still has all these questions, the same questions that we've asked David 150 times. Zoe still has those questions. And she's going to ask everybody she can. And she's going to look for the person that says no to one of these things. And that's her reason to walk out the door. And lo and behold, that's who we meet. We meet this support worker and she says these words to Zoe, and Zoe stops right in her tracks. And then everyone walking around Zoe stops in their tracks. And Zoe's like, I can't do this. I want to leave.
So I'm getting the sense that around this time, there's a lot going on in terms of Daniel fielding a lot of calls and Daniel wanting to set these conversations up to be successful. He's aware of how ambivalent you are. He's aware that it doesn't take much at this point for you to retract, meaning retract your interests and say, no, I'm not doing this. And so on the one hand, he's trying to convince you. He feels like this is best for you. And maybe there's parts of you that feels this is best for you. But everything that service providers say to you at this point becomes really, really important.
Definitely. What Daniel's saying is true. Like, I was just looking for any little thing that I wasn't okay with to be like, okay, that's it. Like, this is what I didn't want, and this is what's happening, and this is not how we can do this. Like, I'm not staying. I can't stay. This is what's going on, and I don't like it. And yeah, I'm not doing it. I was looking for any little thing that I wasn't okay with.
What would help you trust a service provider? And I know this is challenging because you're saying that you don't remember a lot of it. What, if anything, helped you? Like, what did you want to hear?
I know one thing that would have helped is if they had a patient like Zoe in the past that they could refer to.
Oh, yeah.
What they did for her. But it seemed like Zoe was the first.
You know, this is a big and growing field. This is the new big growing field of peer support and lived experience. And it's vital. And Zoe, you're kind of confirming it with a lot of the feedback that you're providing today. It sounds like there's a real disconnect happening. And the disconnect is that, when you are going through problematic substance use and you're in it and you're using polysubstances and it's layered and it's complex and you're scared and you're not quite sure who you can trust. And then there's a group of professionals who know what they're doing. We know they know what they're doing because they are professionals. And yet there's something that's not being communicated, which leaves you as the patient feeling like you can trust this process, or that if things change or start, or things aren't working, that they're going to be able to pivot and do something else. And maybe if you could have had the experience of talking to somebody who had been through it, who could answer your questions about that, what you can expect as a patient, what you can expect as the client, moving through this, that some of these things would have made a big difference. I just want to recap. So it sounds to me like once you were there, once you had gone through the program, you're looking back on the program saying, yeah, it worked. They were good. It worked. I felt supported. It was successful. But the challenges getting into the program, the biggest challenges were understanding what they were going to do, feeling like you could trust the program, and having your questions answered, or, just feeling like you felt safe enough to go into this.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the biggest challenge.
Let's say we wanted to throw some advice out there. We wanted to say, okay, hey, service providers, here's 3 things you can do to help patients, clients feel better about what's about to happen. Like, what would that be?
It's almost like they're just cutting off what we're trying to talk about. It's almost in a sense like it's not the doctor's job to sit there and listen to everything. It's just they're so used to seeing the same things that it's not a big deal to them. It's just on to the next patient, on to the next patient, on to the you know what I mean? They
So
don't.
you might be actually talking a little bit about, or touching a little bit on what we call compassion fatigue. What happens when you're saturated, when you're a professional who got in this for all the right reasons and you're really good at what you do? What happens if this is all your patients all the time?
Yeah.
There's this sense of kind of feeling that as a patient. You kind of feel like, do you feel good about being here today? Do you feel good about listening to me? Do you
Right.
feel good about hearing my story, or am I just another story that you've
Right.
heard before, you think you've heard before?
And that's what I mean when I say like it's not necessarily just bad doctors or nurses. Like it just seems sometimes like it's all medically trained staff. They see it so much that they do it without realizing it. And they might not notice it, but as patients we do.
What other advice would you give?
I don't know. Shit.
I mean, I love that one. I don't want to repeat what Zoe said, but there's a whole story in Zoe that has to be told if you want to understand her situation. And I listened to that story and it changed me like to the core. It rocked me to my core.
What's your advice to service providers?
Oh, exactly what Zoe said. I don't think that even now, or even when we walked into detox, even when Zoe finished her detox, I don't think they appreciated how much Zoe understood about this drug and what it does to the human mind. Like, Zoe's really smart, and drug addicts talk about this kind of stuff. I don't mean to label you as a drug addict, Zoe, sorry.
No.
But they like, Dennis would always talk about stuff like this and the effects. I know he did. I just know it.
So you bring up a really good point, and let's unpack this a little bit. People who use substances are often very knowledgeable. They understand substances. Sometimes they understand substances and substance using more than the interventionists or the professionals that are there to help and support. What does that mean then? What then should service providers do differently given that clients and patients are experts?
Oh, that's interesting.
I get this sense that the listening part, we keep coming back to the listening part. There, you had these experiences, Zoe had these experiences. Um, you know, wanting to have a listening ear, wanting the service provider to offer the time, but to also, make it their priority to get to know your story, to understand.
Yes. And that was my role. And it wasn't just that detox, the pharmacist, it was dealing with the methadone doctor. My goal going in to see each of these people was to make them cry the way that I cried. And then I would know that they understood. And that's what I tried to do. And sometimes I was successful.
So, Daniel, when you think about like other caregivers out there who may be in a similar situation, maybe they're trying to, maybe they're working with their loved one, maybe they're trying to connect with services, maybe they are the point person who's making these initial phone calls and reaching out. Was there anything that you did that helped? Like
Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I did. And it was hard because again, I'm on the phone with so and so. His objective is to get Zoe on the phone. My objective is to get him to stop talking and listen to her story so that he could take that story so seriously. So it was really difficult to do that
and
because a lot of them just wouldn't talk to me. I'm not even going to talk to you. I got to talk to Zoe.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
So when you say you wanted them to take it seriously, I mean, is that what you mean? Is that it felt like they weren't taking it seriously because they wouldn't take the next steps until they heard from Zoe?
I don't mean to be condescending to any of these people, and I'm sure they all took it seriously, but I wanted them to take Zoe's story seriously. And again, I don't want to go into the entire backstory that led up to this moment, but Zoe's anxiety was out of control. Zoe's depression was out of control. It affected everything she did and thought about. Those two things affected everything.
Did they affect her ability to pick up the phone and call detox herself and make these initial phone calls?
Oh, yeah. I would say yes. Absolutely.
So, Zoe, do you think you would have picked up the phone and made those calls on your own at some point?
No, definitely not. Definitely, I wouldn't have been able to do all that.
Do you remember ever thinking about doing that? Like, do you remember ever thinking, okay, I'm gonna look up the number, or I'm gonna make this call? Do you remember being able to organize yourself in that way at that time?
No, I was so fucking unorganized. It's crazy. I just I had no organization whatsoever. I was all over the place. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't pay my bills on time. I didn't have anything in order. I I couldn't even keep up with calling my fucking probation officer every Thursday, like let alone look for numbers to help me through my addiction or reach out to any place. Like I didn't have any type of organization whatsoever.
So, is it fair to say that you may not have gone to medically supported detox if it weren't for Uncle Daniel making those calls and getting that in motion?
Oh, 100%. Like I have to give it to him for all of that because he literally put his everything towards this. He got everything done. He got everything put in order. He was literally the brain outside of my body. And I just wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him.
You see, this highlights to me the value and the importance of caregivers, how incredibly important the caregiver role can be in times like this. And I don't say this to put the burden on anyone, because that's the flip side. We've got systems that are set up in a way that says services are voluntary. And because they're voluntary, not only do you have to identify that, yes, I have problematic substance use, I also want help, and I'm also volunteering for the services that may or may not be available to me. And that is a lot when you're in a place where you're feeling unwell. And
Oh, yeah.
so in this situation, having a care provider who is picking up the phone, advocating, asking for help, asking the questions, this actually put it into motion, and it got it set up. So then you could come in and say, yes, I'm volunteering for this. Yes, I would like the help and the support. But that may not have happened without the support you were receiving to get you to the door.